"Sir, this cabin is for premium passengers only," the flight attendant said, voice clipped and official, as if reciting a rule that did not admit an exception. Fluorescent ceiling lights threw a harsh white over the aisle. The hiss of the ventilation mingled with the soft ping of a tablet and the rustle of boarding passes. He looked up slowly, eyes calm, suit jacket folded across his arm. There was nothing flamboyant about him, only a quiet certainty. "I have a boarding pass for first class," he replied, holding the phone screen toward her like a small, incontrovertible object. Around them, a woman 2 rows back adjusted her earbuds. A child smelled the buttery pop from the snack cart. A man near the window tapped a watch that no one could read. 3 passengers already had phones out. Within seconds, a live stream would go on the air. In less than 45 minutes, a chain reaction would leave the carrier staggering, its stock watchers frantic, and the boardroom scrambling for answers. Could a single refusal reveal something systemic about belonging and power? This was not about one seat. The aisle smelt faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Amy Chen, the lead flight attendant, kept her tablet at chest height, as if it were a shield. "This says Economy Plus," Rafael Ortiz, the gate agent, murmured, after he checked their boarding manifest at the gate kiosk. Marcus Price, CEO of an enterprise software firm, set his phone down and offered a small smile. "My name is Marcus Price. I am on the company roster for this flight, and my ticket is first class." The tablet chirped. "We have scanned all first-class boarding, and your record shows a different section," Amy said. Marcus placed a leather portfolio on the armrest, the grain of the leather worn from travel. "Get my confirmation number up," he asked. "It is on the confirmation email." Raphael scrolled, fingers moving fast enough to be nervous. "Sir, I need you to step back while I verify." A man in a pinstripe suit muttered, "He must be lying about upgrades." Samantha Lee, a teacher, leaned forward and whispered, "He is being calm about it." The live stream began, young Olivia from 14D narrating into her camera. "This man is being told he cannot sit in first class." Comments already flooded. "This looks wrong. Why him? Check his ticket." The cabin cameras blinked benignly. Marcus kept his palms flat on the seat, his breath steady. The immediate charge in the cabin felt electric and small at once, like an ember ready to find dry tinder. Marcus had not always moved through the world with the public quiet he now wore. He had grown up in a row house 2 blocks from the city bus depot where his mother worked double shifts, making sure bills were paid and winter coats mended. As a child, he learned to read arrival boards and timetables the way other children learned bedtime stories. He studied computer science on scholarships, wrote code late into the nights when the city slept, and took a first job at a startup that taught him both the thrill and the exhaustion of scaling things larger than himself. A sudden layoff in his 20s cost him his first apartment and taught him how fragile security could be. That loss hardened his resolve to build companies that valued transparency and accountability. He rose through a combination of technical skill and an insistence that systems should be fair by design. He kept, improbably, the small silver watch his grandfather gave him, and a legal pad with a list of the people he promised to help if he could. He also had enemies who read growth and influence as leverage, and allies in CEOs and community organizers who saw in him a rare blend of results and conscience. This was an arc that did not appear on a boarding pass. It explained why he carried documents in an inner pocket, and why, when challenged, he first tried to be procedural rather than performative. The cabin conversation escalated with details that felt trivial and huge at the same time. "We need to ask you to move to your assigned seat," Amy said, her voice public official, her fingers hovering over the tablet. "I'm not moving. My ticket is for this cabin," Marcus replied. "Sir, you are making other passengers uncomfortable," said Thomas Blake, a man with a clipped voice who had been seated by the window. "This is not about comfort," Marcus said. "This is about whether the manifest and the boarding pass match." "I am asking you to stand up so we can verify," Amy insisted. "Do you have a government ID matching that name?" Raphael asked. "Yes," Marcus answered, handing over a passport with a faint scuff on the corner and a company ID card tucked inside a folio. "You can scan it," he said. 6 people in nearby seats chimed in with opinions. "Maybe he bought the wrong seat," said an older woman. "He probably upgraded last minute," said the man in the suit. A young man by the aisle spoke directly to his phone. "I am live. There is a fight over a seat." Marcus felt the heat of being watched, that peculiar modern sensation where privacy evaporates and judgment crystallizes in comments. He repeated his confirmation number aloud, then spelled his name, then asked for a manager. "Manager is on duty," Amy responded. "She will be here shortly." A hush fell that carried the hum of the engines and the soft clatter of someone opening a laptop. Within minutes, the scene magnified beyond the aircraft. Olivia's live stream had a caption, "Black CEO denied first class." The first comments were incredulous, then outraged, then skeptical in the old online pattern of doubt and conviction. The clip was clipped and reposted across platforms in under 10 minutes. The airline's name trended regionally. Metrics flickered on Marcus's phone as friends texted screenshots. Numbers of views rose in stark numbers, the hashtag evolving into a concise accusation. "This is not about one man," typed a user whose handle was a string of numbers and an emoji. "This looks like discrimination," replied an account labeled as a nonprofit watchdog. Influencers began to reframe the frame. Within the hour, a local journalist messaged a producer. A thread emerged pointing to other complaints at the same gate code. The raw footage made the airline's policies visible in ways official statements could not yet explain. The virality constructed an argument from frames and captions and the steady beat of public feeling. The company's social channel issued a standard holding statement: "We are looking into this." Views kept increasing. Reputational damage does not wait for internal review. Back at the gate, security tightened. 2 officers in Navy uniforms, supervisors with clipped hair and badges, approached. "We need to verify identity in boarding," said Supervisor Linda Park, voice low, clipboard in hand. "Please step down the jetway for a moment," she directed. Marcus followed, the air conditioning feeling cooler and more clinical. "We are only following protocol," Linda said. "We need to be sure of the manifest assignment." "I have confirmation of my first-class seat," Marcus said, showing the email with the ticket attached. He produced a small printed itinerary from his folio when the phone battery blinked low. The supervisor scanned the QR code and frowned. "The boarding scan indicates a mismatch," she said. "Who authorized the change?" Marcus asked. Linda gestured to her radio. "We will need to check with the gate supervisor and the booking desk." A tense exchange followed where legal and policy language slid over human faces. "Do you have any proof of payment or upgrade?" Raphael asked. "I have the corporate account number and a travel policy approval," Marcus said. He pushed a business card forward that read, "Daniel Marcus Price, CEO," not that the order of names mattered. "This seems to be an error," said a woman named Emily Santos, a passenger who introduced herself as a lawyer and offered to check the record. "I am recording this in case," she said, voice steady. "I am too," Samantha added, setting her phone down. The cabin cameras kept panning. A low murmur of disapproval rolled through the boarding area like a small wave. The twist arrived in a moment that the live feed could not capture all at once. Marcus retrieved from his folio a printed memo from his company travel team addressed to the airline corporate travel desk. It listed corporate account numbers, a note about frequent collaborator upgrades, and included a line that read, in plain text, that Marcus had travel privileges as part of a strategic partnership signed 3 months earlier. The memo bore an internal email thread that named 2 senior airline executives as contacts for VIP boarding issues. A single line at the bottom contained a corporate reference number that, if cross-checked, would trigger priority boarding. Amy's tablet blinked, and the expression on her face moved from official distance to a flash of something like recognition. That reference should not be possible on this manifest without a manual override, Raphael said, staring at the printed paper. A woman in a blue suit who had been watching from the back, Jordan Mills from the airline PR team it turned out, stepped forward and took the memo in gloved hands as if it were evidence at a scene. Heads turned. "This is not a mistake," muttered Thomas Blake. "This is a policy problem." The live stream grew louder. comments changing from curiosity to accusation. The scene that began as a seat dispute had presented a document that altered the balance of power. For the passengers, it was a revelation. For the airline, it was an unanticipated vulnerability. The murmurs became a chorus. Someone said, "This man represents more than himself," and the phrase landed like a stone. A conference call was convened within the hour. The airline's executive vice president of operations, Carlos Vega, was patched in along with chief counsel Emily Santos from the airline legal team, not the earlier passenger. Marcus watched as a small television in the gate area displayed a video conference feed of men and women trading terse phrases in a room high above the terminal. "We are looking at a potential breach of our boarding protocol and liability," Carlos said into the camera, voice measured. The airline head of security, Linda Park, relayed the onboard events with a clipped recount. "We have a memo suggesting manual override authorization," she said. "Who on your side authorized that?" demanded Richard Hale, a board member who spoke with the brittle air of someone used to speaking last. Marcus remained in the frame of the local camera, but not the meeting room itself. He listened as the airline executives parsed chain of custody questions and public relations angles. "We need to verify the corporate account authorization and who had access," Chief Counsel Emily said. "If this memo is authentic, it implies a procedural failure and potential discrimination claim." "Do not say discrimination until we have facts," Richard snapped. "Facts will be what the public sees in our feeds," someone replied. Voices in the boardroom echoed the old split between legal caution and reputational urgency. Marcus felt the room narrow and widen at once. He was not there to cause harm. He was there, as he had always been, to insist on transparency. The first moment of real crisis was procedural yet explosive. The airline released a brief statement that said it regretted the incident and would investigate. The statement was read by the PR director, Jordan Mills, with eyes on a script, then pushed to social channels. The live stream replayed the segment of Amy asking Marcus to move and the memo in his hand. Engagement numbers spiked. A civil rights lawyer who had been tagged in the stream posted a short analysis offering to represent Marcus pro bono. An investor relations alert flagged the event and the airline stock tumbled in intraday trading as algorithms and human traders reacted to the potential legal and reputational exposure. Activist shareholders messaged the airline board demanding urgent answers. The airline's compliance team scrambled to pull audit logs and access records. For many staff, the record retrieval process became a race. A technical explanation of chain of custody and access logs is necessary here to make sense of the steps the airline had to take. The chain of custody in this context refers to the recorded sequence of access events that show who modified booking data and when. Auditors look for timestamps, user IDs, and corroborating approvals in order to determine whether an override was authorized or an error occurred. The audit workflow must show an immutable trail to establish responsibility and liability. The airline disclosed that their booking system recorded entries, but that manual overrides could be affected by authorized staff or by a back-end user with administrative privileges. The complexity of the record-keeping meant the timeline could be reconstructed, but only with internal cooperation. The second moment of tension arrived when the head of customer experience, Marissa Cole, was sent down to the gate. She stepped into the scene with a measured face and a stack of printed internal emails. "We are conducting a thorough review," she said, voice intended to reassure and to slow the fever. "We have temporarily suspended employee access to that override function pending review," she added. Marcus watched as people in the gate area debated whether the suspension was an appropriate first step or a gesture. A passenger shouted, "What about accountability for the person who did this?" Marissa said that the airline would notify regulators and had opened an internal case number. The regulator mentioned carried weight. Once federal agencies were alerted, a formal inquiry could follow. A short exchange of legal representatives and PR staff occurred live on camera when the airline attempted to broker a private resolution. "We can offer a formal apology and compensation," Marissa said. Marcus listened. An apologetic script was, in many ways, a shop-worn tool for companies facing public ire. This was not about compensation for him. This was about preventing the structural erasure that happened when rules could be applied arbitrarily. Around him, people argued about whether a formal apology would satisfy the momentum that had built online. The live stream comments demanded more than words. They demanded evidence. The third moment of tension moved the fight to the boardroom. Marcus received a call from his own counsel and then from a representative of a major institutional shareholder who had seen the clip and was concerned about governance risks. At the airline's board meeting, the general counsel presented a timeline and the leaked memo. "If this is accurate, we face a systemic exposure to discrimination claims and a corporate governance question," said the counsel. "We must present both corrective measures and metrics to the public." Within 72 hours, the boardroom's tone shifted from curiosity to crisis. Richard Hale, who chaired several committees, asked whether compliance had performed a systems audit in the last quarter. "Not fully," admitted the director of compliance in a dry voice. The board demanded an independent audit and an immediate hotline for anonymous reporting. The tone of the meeting grew urgent. "We will draft demands," said one director. "We will require full cooperation from operations," said another. Marcus watched as the airline's leadership moved from defensive postures to concession and then to a tactical plan. It was in that room that public accountability translated into corporate steps. The board did not want a slow rot of shareholder value or a long legal entanglement. They wanted a quick narrative about contrition and reform. That pressure, economic and reputational, is what would force changes to stick. When demands were formalized, they were precise and they were swift. Within 24 hours, the airline issued a schedule of steps, including an internal review with external auditors, mandatory training on implicit bias for all frontline staff to be completed in 60 days, a temporary pause on manual overrides to boarding manifests until new authentication protocols were in place, and public reporting of complaint metrics weekly for the next quarter. The airline also promised to meet a 72-hour deadline to produce access logs and transcripts for internal review. Marcus and his counsel requested that the airline produce the names of any employees who had made manual overrides in the preceding 6 months, along with justification and approvals. The airline counsel agreed to provide redacted versions of those records to protect employee privacy while preserving accountability. The demands carried teeth. Failure to comply would trigger immediate public escalation, including potential shareholder action and regulatory referral. The language of the ultimatum was measured but clear. It translated public outrage into corporate obligations. Implementation moved with a visible tempo. 1 month later, the airline had taken immediate steps that could be documented. They had suspended 2 frontline supervisors pending investigation and placed them on administrative leave. A new ticketing authentication system had been rolled out in beta across 3 major hubs, requiring a second level of approval for any manual override. The airline reported a 43% drop in boarding complaints at those hubs in the first 2 weeks following the changes. Training sessions began with facilitators who were certified in conflict de-escalation and bias awareness. A public dashboard launched listing complaint counts, resolution times, and follow-up actions. The company had also set up an anonymous hotline that was managed by an external compliance firm to ensure chain of custody and confidentiality. For many passengers and staff, the visible actions felt like progress. For Marcus, the measures were a test of sincerity. He had insisted that transparency mean regular public metrics and that the board establish a third-party review. The airline complied. The media buzz shifted from outrage to skeptical optimism. The phrase that had begun to circulate across feeds, "This is not about one man," kept repeating itself and collecting new meaning. 30 days after the incident, Marcus received a formal letter from the airline offering a public apology and outlining the steps taken. They acknowledged procedural failures and the need for governance reform. The CEO of the airline issued a statement promising to review culture and practice and invited Marcus to participate in an advisory capacity on the new accountability committee. Marcus considered the offer carefully. Accepting might shape policy for the future. Declining might be interpreted as a missed opportunity to change practices from inside. He chose to accept with terms. The advisory role would be non-executive and would come with access to compliance audits and a seat at public briefings. Activist shareholders noted the move as significant, and the airline's share volatility began to settle as the market priced in the changes. Community organizers and civil rights groups praised the establishment of the hotline and the public metrics, but continued to demand stronger labor protections and structural change. For Marcus, the moment was not a victory lap. It was a beginning and a test. 3 months later, the airline published the results of an independent audit and an initial set of recommendations. The audit found that manual overrides had been used in ways that lacked consistent documentation and that access privileges were too broadly granted. It recommended tighter role-based access controls, mandatory attestation fields for any manual change, and quarterly audits that would be published in summary form for accountability. The airline reported a 67% reduction in complaints related to boarding inequities across the hubs where new protocols had been implemented. The complaint dashboard showed improvement, and the hotline received a steady stream of reports that were being triaged promptly. Employee feedback sessions were scheduled, and the airline announced partnerships with community organizations to better train staff. Marcus, who had engaged in several advisory meetings, saw that the conversation had shifted from a single event to an institutional learning curve. He also noted that the policies had to survive beyond headlines and that governance needed teeth. The board agreed to a policy requiring documentation for any manual override and to publish executive summaries of compliance audits. 6 months on, the changes had begun to ripple outward. Other carriers and transit agencies took notice, and some adopted similar authentication protocols. The airline published its 6-month compliance report showing sustained decline in discriminatory incidents and an uptick in reported near misses that were caught by the new system. Training completion rates were above 90%, and a new position of Chief Ethics Officer had been created and filled by a candidate from outside the industry. The airline announced a grant to community nonprofits aimed at improving travel equity and promised to fund research into the effects of algorithmic triage and staff discretion on service outcomes. Judicially, a small number of complaints advanced toward mediation, and one civil suit was settled with a commitment to fund systemic monitoring. On a human level, Marcus met with frontline staff who described feeling more empowered to question questionable practices and to call for clarity without fear of retaliation. The changes were measurable and imperfect. The epilogue first-month update was precise. 30 days after the incident, the airline had placed 2 supervisors on leave, had rolled out a temporary override suspension, and had launched mandatory training modules. The new hotline went live, and the public dashboard reported initial metrics showing a 43% drop in boarding complaints at the pilot hubs. The airline committed to producing access logs within 72 hours and invited an independent auditor to review the system. Community groups were invited to consult on training content, and the airline announced a temporary fund to support travel complaints processing. The tone among passengers shifted from raw anger to watchful expectation. The airline promised further updates, and regulators indicated they were monitoring the situation. The small center of the storm had moved outward into formal accountability. The 3-month update recorded structural progress and hard numbers. An independent audit found deficiencies in authorization protocols and recommended role-based access controls, attestation fields, and quarterly audits. The airline implemented 2/3 of the recommendations in the first 90 days and reported a 67% reduction in boarding-related complaints in monitored hubs. Training completion rates exceeded 75%, with facilitators brought in to address implicit bias and conflict resolution. The advisory committee that included Marcus delivered a public summary, and the airline committed to publishing quarterly summaries of compliance checks. Activist shareholders continued to press for long-term governance changes, and the airline agreed to a standing review each quarter. Media narratives evolved from viral scandal to institutional accountability. The 6-month update showed that policies had begun to take hold and influence the industry. The airline published a 6-month compliance report documenting sustained reductions in discriminatory incidents and an increase in reported near misses that were caught by new systems. The position of Chief Ethics Officer was created and filled, and the airline announced partnerships with nonprofits to research disparities in travel. Other carriers replicated authentication protocols, and a small number of legal claims moved toward mediation, with precedent for systemic monitoring included in settlement terms. Marcus remained in an advisory role, focused on transparency metrics and public reporting. The metrics suggested meaningful change, but also highlighted ongoing work on labor protections and consistent enforcement. The larger lesson was clear. Systems change is iterative and requires persistent public scrutiny and internal will. If you have watched this and felt a flare of anger or a pulse of recognition, pause for a moment and breathe. Think about the times you have seen someone pushed aside or told they did not belong. Describe it in the comments, starting with "I saw," and include one sentence about where it happened and one sentence about what you wish had happened. Your words help. Others see patterns, and your specific recollections can turn private experiences into public evidence. We read every comment, and many of them inform follow-up reporting and community resources. Your voice joins a larger archive that can make institutions accountable. If you prefer not to write publicly, you can share a private account through the link below to an independent reporting line. This community is built on respect and on the idea that documenting injustice is a step toward preventing it. Thank you for contributing. Now we return to how this unfolded at the corporate level and what concrete mechanisms were put in place to make sure a single incident could drive systemic change. In the end, this was not about one man fighting for a seat. The incident exposed weaknesses in policy and governance that allowed discretionary power to be exercised without consistent documentation or accountability. The evidence that triggered the collapse of the immediate institutional defense was mundane: a printed memo, a boarding scan, a live stream. But together, they created a narrative and a legal pathway. The company took measurable steps, including suspensions, authentication rollouts, and new training. Shareholders and regulators demanded transparency, and the airline produced audit logs and metrics. Metrics matter. They convert discrete grievances into trends that boards and investors cannot ignore. This story shows that when documentation meets pressure and the economic incentives are aligned, institutions can and will change. If you witnessed injustice, document it, share it, and support groups that help turn individual harm into policy remedies. Change begins with evidence and is sustained by ongoing public attention. Sometimes a denied seat is the first sign of a system that treats people unequally. Sometimes an ordinary moment becomes a lever for accountability. Marcus left the gate that day not simply claiming a right to a place, but insisting that the company answer a broader question about how power is distributed in its systems. The airline crumbled for a short time, not because of one act, but because systems revealed their seams. What followed was not perfect, but it was a start, and it showed a path for others. If this story moved you, subscribe to follow updates and to learn how to turn individual incidents into institutional reforms. Because justice is not a single encounter. Justice is the set of rules and practices that keep people safe and equal every time they walk into a public space.